This week's On Story, The Man in the High Castle screenwriter Jihan Crowther and King Richard screenwriter Zach Baylin.
And those were some of my favorite because then I can just ask a million questions and sort of get a real color of like what the time was like. I just like to really read like little articles from the time to see like what people who are writing about the time at the time actually felt about that period. Like I find that to be really interesting and to bring like a different perspective.
In this episode, join Jihan Crowther from the Underground Railroad and Man in the High Castle, and Zach Baylin, screenwriter of King Richard, as they discuss tackling real-life events and how they translate on screen.
I'm curious about balancing sort of the ethical and moral choices or dilemmas that may come up when you're dealing with a historical event or larger-than-life historical person or figure.
It's tricky, especially when the people that you're writing about are alive. I mean, I think that the process with King Richard, I wrote that script without the family's involvement originally. So we've sort of felt if we were gonna get their blessing and get their trust to actually like build it out in the right way, that the only chance was to sort of bring them a script that was representative of what we thought it could be. It's complicated because one, everyone remembers certain events differently, and particularly this story was about their childhood and trying to go back and be like, what was dinner time like when you were 8?
If we eat fast enough, we probably have time for the talent show.
Oh, wait, hold on. I'm going first. I already know what I'm saying.
Let me guess.
Because the greatest love of all. It's so funny. This song's a great song. Move. Leave Serena alone.
Thank you, Mom.
Give this out.
You're sort of then again like extrapolating through a lens of time and memory. For us on that film particularly, it was really important to have it be as grounded in fact as possible. So we tried to take very little liberties.
The show that I'll be referencing is like, it's Underground Railroad, so that was about a specific time period, and it's historical fiction, but there's a lot of things that were rooted in fact that were also then extrapolated into the story that we read. Everything that we are doing has to feel true to the story, but also true to that period of history because it's such, the way it's taught. Every state has different feelings about slavery, right? So like even like I grew up in Virginia and we were taught about it as like the North is like getting in our business. And so I remember like repeating that at home and my mom's like, sorry, what? So we had to we wanted to be as clear as possible about that period and about what people actually lived through and what their lives actually looked like. And so that was really very intense research, but it was also worthwhile because if you were sort of thinking about where would maybe Cora or what might she be thinking? And like you're reading different slave narratives and you have a greater sense of what her true next steps are. And of course, Colson did a lot of the heavy lifting in the book. And
to that point, Jihan, I'm curious, there's a lot of painful moments tied to the Underground Railroad and what you try to represent, going back to that earnestness. How did you all balance that while also, from my perspective, imbuing the show with this sense of hope as well at every turn?
I think the story itself in a lot of ways was like a hopeful story. Somebody who was living in a time, and it's hard to think about how many generations slavery went on, where people were, their great-great-great-great-great-great-grandparents were enslaved, and their great-great-great-great-great-grandchildren would be enslaved. And with Cora and some of the other characters, it felt like they imagined a life for themselves that didn't exist and they didn't know was possible because there was, of course, so much limited on most plantations. Like the information is limited. What people are able to find out, it's a lot of like whispering and maybe you hear some gossip about what's happening on another farm, but it's all like this internal understanding of yourself and your place in the world and wanting to like go forward, whatever that takes, right? So we just kind of went with the spirit of that, just sort of smaller slave narratives where you're just like, oh, that need to be free is just human nature.
See that red roof there? That's us.
I mean, that's you. Don't nobody know I'm coming.
What they do now? You ready?
And that makes those generations of enslavement just all the more just devastating. And I think we took the hard stuff and it was, I mean, really hard. Like there would be days where Barry's like, everybody okay from what we were talking about the day before. And, you know, we'd go home and do research. And even he extended that to when they were shooting, which he had a therapist on the set in case anybody needs to talk about any of the work they were doing or what they were experiencing, because obviously it's so realistic.
Zach, for you, what drew you to this project and what really sort of propelled you to continue the development process on it? Like we talked about, it took a little time to get the Williams family involved and work through some of the script process with them.
There's like this kind of legendary story that Richard, who was not a tennis player, was a security guard in Compton, in the 70s watched a tennis match on TV, saw the victor, a young woman, like get a big check, which was more money than he had made it in the year. And he sort of said, well, if I had daughters, they could be better than this. So he wrote a sort of legendary 80-page plan like that night of everything. Like, if I am going to teach these girls how to play tennis, here's what I'll do. Here's the hours of the day they'll have to train, all this stuff. But he had never played tennis. He didn't have any sort of inroads into the sport. And Venus and Serena had not been born yet. So essentially everything, he had this plan. He had Venus and Serena, and he like started shopping, going around to coaches and country clubs and trying to raise money and get coaches to coach them pro bono.
This deal you're asking for, you know, all of this for free, Richard? Nobody's taking that bet. You know, tennis is a technical game, you know, probably one of the most, and if you didn't grow up with the game, then yeah, it's like playing the violin. You know, it takes hours and hours a day, you know, year after year of expensive, expert instruction just to hold the thing right. Yeah, and even then, even for families with unlimited financial resources, the chances of achieving the kind of mastery and success that you're talking about, I mean, for one kid, let alone two, it's like asking somebody to believe that you got the next two Mozarts living in your house.
And obviously, essentially everything that he predicted in that plan happened. I sort of knew that story tangentially because I'm a big tennis fan. Then I had a meeting with a producer who had been trying to sort of get that story off the ground. It was very just kind of fortuitous that we met. I also I have young kids, and I really had been interested in writing about like being a parent, and you know, and just about like the American dream in a way, but maybe through a perspective that like doesn't get told. I kind of knew as soon as the conversation started that I was like, this could be a really impactful, you know, story, and it covered like, I think when I'm looking for something, you know, like, does it have a huge character at the heart of it? Is the story itself like just propulsive and churning, and like, can it get your, you know, blood going? And then does it have a chance to really just connect with an audience? And so that this felt like there was no other story that I'd been around that felt that powerful. We got very lucky that Will Smith sort of had read the script fairly early on and we knew he was interested. But again, everyone knew we needed the family's involvement. So I was very, conscientious and very, concerned about it in some ways. I think you always you have a real duty to get it right. But I felt particularly in this case that if I got it wrong, it was going to be very disastrous. I had so much archival footage of Richard. So beginning there, I knew that I could at least get his voice correct because a lot of times I was frankly using a lot of real dialogue that he had said. And then also I knew, I knew going in that it was to really get it right, that we would need to be able to sit down and allow Venus and Serena and Oracene and Richard really talk about experiences that I would not have been a part of. Having the opportunity to sit with the real people and to say what was your experience here? What were the things you were frustrated about? What was bedtime like?
10 o'clock, girls, time for bed.
Saturn.
All right. You all wrote in your journals, made your plans for tomorrow?
Yes, Daddy.
That's right, got to have a plan for every day, else what?
No plan, you plan to fail.
That's right, we not failing, are we?
No, Daddy.
Okay, all the way to the top.
Come on, Nico.
You know, one day not too long from now, somebody gonna hand you girls a check for $1 million. And you gonna buy as many beds as you want.
And one check, really?
Maybe even a couple of them. But we're not gonna be like this forever, okay?
Okay.
All right. You girls go to bed.
Good night, Daddy.
For you, Jihan, you've had work on The Man in the High Castle and now The Underground Railroad, two pieces that were developed based off of historical fiction, or novels, pardon me. So how did you go about, in your writer's room, go about developing those characters, maybe further adding some pieces to them that may not have been represented in the novel? And how did you also find yourselves having to pull back potentially as well?
Yeah, with Man in the High Castle, by the time I joined the room, we were already off book. So a lot of it was just brand new invention. And we had, but the approach they took to the book is the book was like the Bible. And so it was just constant referencing that, and anything we built outside of that had to feel like it was truly part of that world. And then also we were really lucky to have Philip K. Dick's daughter as the executive producer. And she, first of all, is an incredible producer and such a great collaborator. But she also brought, sort of a bit of a saying yeah, this is kind of what Dad meant, or this isn't quite right. And for the fourth season, there were lots of sort of stories that he started and didn't get to finish. And we used some of those stories to create the sort of arc for the fourth season. And so I found that to be really exciting. It's just ooh, secret papers. I love those kinds of things,
Between Man in the High Castle and Underground Railroad, both pieces utilize magical realism and sort of recontextualizing our ideas of these historical events in such a fascinating way. As a writer's room, how did you all go about the process of utilizing that mechanic and that storytelling technique?
I think for Man in the High Castle, it was about not letting it spin out of control, because we were just maybe they can go in the past and we just go crazy. And then we're okay, so then actually what's the story? And still focusing on the sort of matter at hand and the period at hand, because it can be really fun to play with those things. It's always exciting when you can do anything that feels a little bit magic, or that adds this kind of sparkle to something. And so I think for Man in the High Castle, it was really about, is this going to function? Is this going to tell the story better than if we didn't use it? And then for the Underground Railroad, it's so interesting because the sort of magical realism aspect of it and the kind of sci-fi aspect of it is so light. It almost doesn't feel like it's happening. So even something like an elevator is actually magical for that period because, of course, it didn't exist, like the idea of a high rise. And so, and that was, Coulson's whole invention. And so that was really exciting. And to sort of work with this idea of like people in this period being more advanced than the time allowed, and almost like bringing the future in, but in a way that felt like it was a natural part of the story. A lot of that was Coulson's writing. Then the other half of it was, of course, was Barry's genius brain.
Were there a couple of particular moments from King Richard and Jihan you can speak to the Underground Railroad or The Man in the High Castle that you were really looking forward to seeing that in its final sort of produced stage?
I mean, there were certain scenes that I was like, this is the one I really want to see, on screen and have people see. There's a later in the film, there's a big like kind of argument between Richard and Orsine, his wife. That's sort of like where everything from the movie has, between their characters for years, sort of bubbles to the surface.
Do you think you did this by yourself?
From the first day we met. Remember that, out on that bus stop? You didn't even tell me your real name. Because you thought I was just another dumb. You just like them white boys. You never believed in none of this.
When did I not believe? I want you to tell me, when did I not believe? You're not the only dreamer in this family. Wouldn't be no dream if it wasn't for me. I carried them inside me and on my back. And I carried you, too. Working 2 shifts so I could put food on your table. That open stance, you got that from me.
Oh, you did that? Oh, okay.
And I fixed Serena's serve because you messed that up.
You did what?
Yes, I fixed that toss because you messed it up. I'm here, I've been here, dreaming and believing just like you. You just don't want to see me.
I find like arguments to be the sort of the funnest things to write. And that scene is really explosive and it was always existed in the script. And then on the day of the shoot, we knew we were shooting the next day and stayed late on set with Will and Anjanou, the woman who plays Orsine, who's incredible. And just like rehearsed and rebroke the scene and rewrote it. And I typed up the pages that night and we had them the next day. And it was just like, that scene's amazing. In terms of like, kill your darlings, I mean, I think that the whole process of writing is just like, you're just constantly throwing things away and that the things that you held on to at the beginning end up, maybe feeling meaningless at the end.
I think for TV, because the writing process is so much more collaborative, there's like times where you're not even killing your darlings, they're just being like murdered in front of you because they're just like, you're just kind of like love a scene and they're like, oh, I think that goes in episode 9. You're like, no, episode 9 doesn't deserve that scene. But like it ultimately like makes, sense. And so I think with my episode of Man in the High Castle, I was originally supposed to have this scene where we get to like I get to kill Nazis in this really great way. And I was just like, yes, like get to kill Nazis. And then they were like, we're actually moving that. I think that belongs in 2 episodes down. And I was just like, I was told I could kill Nazis. And so, and I had like this whole like choreography. I was like, yes, I have the scene. And then it was like gone. And so I just had to be like, okay, that's fine. And then just trying to think of like something else that felt true to the story, but kind of fresh. So I write plays as well. I started in theater and I love musicals, although I'm not very good at writing musicals. But there was this song that we learned about that the British soldiers used to sing called Hitler's Only Got One Ball, which I love. And I was just like, I gotta have a song and dance. And so like I like conspired with like one of my showrunners. I was just like, David, I need to have that song. I want them to dance. Like, and he's just like, what? And so I kind of like explained like what the scene would be. And like really it was just about when people are like in revolution, like we see, of course, like the sort of struggles, but there's also like moments of joy because there have to be, otherwise you're not going to be able to make it, right? So, and that's something that hadn't been kind of touched on the show before. And so I thought, like, here's like a moment. This is like a quiet moment in a way we can like make a scene of it that feels different and that feels true to like anybody who's in revolution, and I think a lot about like Malcolm X, like we read his words a lot, but sometimes you'll watch him in a video and he's actually like laughing or like smirking. He's just like, no, which I really love. And so like, I just kind of, so somebody who's in the middle of something can find joy, and that's what we did. And so I remember I was like, I'm going to name the episode Hitler's Only Got One Ball. Like I'm committed, like this is not getting cut. It's not getting cut. And so I remember it was like, okay, we have to like pitch it to like Amazon. And then we were at a some party from some other show, and they're like, okay, like let's get our exec aside and start to talk about it. And as I was talking about it, his face was like, and I was like, never mind, wait till you read it. But like ultimately I got it. But like it was like because of the death of this other thing that I was able to like fight for that. So yeah. Yeah.
Hitler has only got one ball. Goring has two but very small. Himmler is rather similar, but poor old Goebbels has no balls at all.
Hitler has only got one ball, the other is in the Albert Hall. His mother, that dirty grubber, cut it off when he was small. She threw it into the concord tree. He fell into the deep blue sea. The fishes got out their dishes and had scallops and bollocks for tea.
Zach, for you, how do you strike that balance of, for example, catering to big moments, but also really respecting those characters, especially in a context like with King Richard, where you have a living character still able to give advice in the script process and things of that nature?
When I write when I like outline a script, I know that I'm going to have, okay, these are these huge, these are the sort of turning points, big touchstones in the movie. So like that these will, even if it's not a explosion, like these are the set pieces. This is like the first time Venus plays a junior tournament. What is that going to feel like when the family walks into a white country club for the first time?
Look at that. Look at that. Come on. You see who that is?
Yes.
Who's that?
John McEnroe.
That's right. Who's that?
That's Pete Sampras.
Mm-hmm. One day, they're gonna be bragging about the time they met the two of you.
You want to walk the audience into that through these specific characters. So yes, we're going to introduce this huge setting, but it's like, what was it like for Richard? What was it like for Venus and Serena and Orsine? What were anxieties and all those little sort of day-to-day things? What were they bringing into that moment?
You've been watching Fact versus Fiction on Story. On Story is part of a growing number of programs in Austin Film Festival's On Story project that also includes the On Story radio program, podcast, book series, and the On Story archive, accessible through the Whitliff Collections at Texas State University. To find out more about On Story and Austin Film Festival, visit onstory.tv or austinfilmfestival.com. Want to see On Story live? Join us at Austin Film Festival's annual Writers Conference each October. Visit www.austinfilmfestival.com to find out more about badges and passes to attend the festival.